Welcome to the second screencast about completing the Inputs tab of the new tool, which covers sections 4, 5, and 6 related to revenues. If you haven't already watched the first screencast, please do so first. At the end of the last screencast, we had completed the tool through section 3, which focused largely on payments for resident and mentor stipends. This screencast focuses on the next 3 sections, which all relate to resources coming into the program. When we open up section 4, you'll notice that the format changes. Instead of a series of questions, the tool includes a table to capture information about specific line items in the budget. And if we scroll to the far right, there we go, the tool begins building a 5-year forecast, showing total and per resident amounts. In a few spots, such as row 100 that captures the value of any continuing education credits for mentors, the tool also draws on information entered in the mentor and resident sections above. So before we move on, I want to share a disclaimer. And we found that this tool does a solid job capturing the financials for nonprofit lead partners. It is not as good a fit for some district and IHE lead partners that primarily receive staff and materials rather than dollars from their parent organization, the larger university or district. An IHE lead partner may generate revenue from resident tuition, but unless the program actually receives some or all of those dollars to run the program, we recommend using this section in-kind contributions to estimate your quote-unquote revenues. So what do we mean by in-kind contributions? This section should capture any staff, services, or goods that the lead partner receives that has a monetary value, but for which the program did not directly pay. For example, if the IHE provides coaching support even though a nonprofit is a lead partner, or if the district provides office space, those materials and services would go here. We have found that programs often struggle to put monetary values on these contributions. And that makes sense, right? Because they're not paying for them. You don't exactly know what those values are. But I just want to encourage you to provide your best estimate to develop a more accurate budget and understanding of your total program costs. Better numbers will also allow you to better compare your program to other NCTR partner programs. So the tool includes placeholders for some of the most common in-kind contributions that programs receive. Right here in column A, office space, utilities, insurance, office materials, recruiting services, and the program director. If any of those if your program received any of those in-kind contributions, then you will complete the cells to the right. And if not, you just leave those cells blank. And if your program receives or anticipates receiving additional contributions outside of that list, you can add them in rows 108 to 111 here. So before we close this section up, I just want to highlight a few columns. First is column G, staff. This column asks if the contribution is a staff person or not. Staff only includes salaried FTEs rather than hourly employees. So you'll see that the 2 full-time coaches right here, I just realized we have to fix that, it's not 1 FTE, it's 2. They are listed as staff, but the administrative support that the program will receive comes from an hourly employee, so that is not counted as staff, it's just a flat fee. Also want to highlight column F, the starting school year. In this tool, when you use the tool, you're going to want to list any in-kind contribution or revenue or expense that you anticipate receiving, not just immediately as the program starts, but over the next 5 years. So in this example, we're assuming that administrative support actually doesn't kick in until 1920, which we indicate in column F. And then also want to highlight columns O and P, and those are kind of the inverse of the one we just talked about with the start date. They provide a way to indicate if a certain contribution is temporary. For example, in this scenario with ATR, the data system development is a one-time cost. So column O says yes, it is temporary, and that it will end, it says 1819, but that won't work. It's going to be 1920, the same year that it starts. And then scrolling to the right again, we can see how these in-kind contributions play out over the next few years, both as a total and then per resident. Let's close this section down and open up the next one, delayed revenues received by the residency program. So Section 5, delayed revenues, is probably the most complicated. It aims to capture any revenues tied to residency graduates. So for example, if a district receives a retention fee or if residents pay the program a training fee once they begin teaching. In the scenario in the pre-work, the program receives a training fee from residents when they begin teaching. So first, I'm going to select yes, there's a delayed revenue. And then let's talk through these different columns. So the first cohort of the program in 2018-19 will also be the first residents who are going to pay this training fee. But that won't happen until they graduate in 1920, which is why we have the starting school year here in column G. The residents will make this payment just one time. So we have yes checked off in column F. And future cohorts will make this payment as well, which we indicate in column I. Then, of course, perhaps the most important, how much will this fee be? We have $5,000 in column L. Scrolling to the right, we can see how this plays out. You can see that the delayed revenue source doesn't kick in until 1920, right? Because they have to wait, the program needs to wait for that first residency cohort to start teaching. And then, although each resident graduate pays $5,000, the amount per resident is less than that until 2020, 21, 22. And that's because that's the first year where there's the same number of residency graduates as residents, which is 60. So for these per resident amounts, we're always, the tool is always dividing by the number of residents that year, which is why we have values slightly lower than 5,000 for a couple of years. All right, let's close that down and open the last section pertaining to revenues. Oh, there we go. So this section is more straightforward. It captures all other revenues the program receives, excluding funds earmarked for resident or mentor stipends, since we already captured those above. And for ATR, there aren't too many, just 2 non-recurring grants. But if we scroll to the forecasting columns to the right, which you know we'll do, scroll to the right. We can also see that the resident stipend dollars are in here in row 133. Based on the information we put higher up in section 2. One quick note before we wrap up this section. So if we go back to the left, I do want to highlight column G, which asks whether the funding source is fixed or variable. In other words, does the amount of funding or revenue that the program receives grow as the number of residents grow? Is it linked to the number of residents who are enrolled? For the 2 grants that are mentioned that ATR is drawn on, the answer is no, but certainly for others it could be yes. And if it is variable, the amount we put in column L will be the per resident amount rather than the total, because the number of residents may change over time. So that's the end of screencast 2. Please continue on to the 3rd screencast, which will take us to the end of the inputs tab.